And here we are back with part 4, and we'll continue our discussion of the supply curve. And we're going to look at movements along the supply curve and shifts of a supply curve. Now notice the shape of the supply curve. Its shape slopes up and to the right, and what that tells us, okay, is that if the price is low, then the suppliers are going to want to supply a lot less of the item. And as the price increases, they'll supply a lot more. Lower price, a lot fewer. Higher price, a lot more. Okay? So, and why is this? Okay? Well, if we look at the curve and think for a moment, okay, what the supplier has is relatively fixed costs in the short term. Okay? So what this means is certain of the cost of production, such as labor costs, because the owner of a company can't come in and willy-nilly change the amount they pay each worker per hour. They can't do that on a daily basis or every week or so, change the amount per hour they pay the person, and sometimes take it down, sometimes increase it. So normally in the short run, whatever their going wage rate is that they're paying their workers, that'll stay the same in the short run. Maybe in the long term they can adjust their wage rate, but in the short term it's normally fixed. Likewise, many other costs are fixed in the short term. For example, let's say they're renting a building to work in. They can't suddenly just walk away from that building. They're still committed to that rent for the period of time of their lease. So during the short run, that's a fixed cost for them. Okay? So now, if they have these relatively sticky costs of production, if the price they can sell their product for goes up dramatically, okay, then and well above their cost, then they will want to sell an awful lot of that item. Okay? So the higher the price, the more they're going to want to sell. By the same token, because their costs are relatively sticky, if the price that they can get for their product goes down, then they're not going to want to supply nearly as many, and they will supply fewer and fewer. And remember, one of the main assumptions of supply and demand, of free market supply and demand as we're discussing it here, is that there are many, many, many buyers, none of which are so big and buy so many that they can control the price. And at the same time, there are many, many, many sellers, and no one seller is so big that they can control the market, okay, or set the price, if you will. So everyone is pretty much constrained by what the free market price ends up being. Okay? So they have to respond to it that way. Now, we've already seen the movement along the supply curve, and that happens only on the basis of a price change. Okay? Now, how do we accomplish a shift in the supply curve? Very similar to a shift in the demand curve. So first we'll start off with some data. In this case, the data is going to be a situation where there's going to be less supplied at every price. So we see that here at $11, that now we'll supply 11 million, where before we were supplying 11 million at $9. Okay, now at $9 we're only going to supply 9 million. So we'll let it go through its system, and you notice that at $9 a pound we had less supplied at that price. At 7 million, now there's less supplied. At 5 million, there's less supplied. At 3 million, there's less supplied. And at 1 million, we don't even have data for that now in the new supply curve. And we label that supply curve S2. Okay? So now we have a shift where less is supplied at every price. Okay? So why did that shift occur? Well, the reasons are, it could have been because there were fewer suppliers in the marketplace. So if a lot of suppliers quit the business, the suppliers that are left will be supplying less at every price. Okay? There may be an increase in the cost of some of the inputs. In the case of coffee beans, let's assume that fertilizer is an expense of production, cost of production of coffee beans, and if the cost of fertilizer goes up dramatically, then suppliers will be supplying less coffee beans at every price because their cost of production just went up. There, use the example of worsening technology. Now, there isn't really a situation where you have worsening technology, so I've lined through it. Normally, technology improves. Okay? But there could be some kind of a catastrophe similar to the Haiti earthquake of December 2009, where the entire infrastructure of the island was completely obliterated, all the buildings and everything else. And therefore there might be a throwback in technology because of something like that. Okay? But it would cause less to be supplied at every price. Okay? A change in the expectations of the suppliers could cause them to supply less at every price. An example might be if they're expecting a recession where there's going to be a lot less demand, then in general the suppliers will try to cut back their production early to minimize their costs and their exposure, and therefore they'll be supplying less at every price. And then finally, if there was a change in the cost of a related product. Now this is a little different than what we were talking about in the demand side. Here we're talking about the supplier can make either product, and use the example for just a moment of gasoline or heating oil. They get a barrel of crude oil, and they can refine that barrel of crude oil either into gasoline or into heating oil, but they can't make it into both things. Okay? So therefore, if the price of the heating oil goes up dramatically, then the refiners are going to make less gasoline and more heating oil. Well, the same thing would be true of our coffee beans. If our growers could make, grow some other product on their land, and the price that they could get for that product goes up dramatically, then they're probably going to supply a lot less of the original product. So if there was a substitute product that they could produce on the land rather than coffee beans, and it was going to return them an awful lot of money, they'd probably give up production of the coffee beans, and there'd be less coffee beans at every price. Okay? So we'll continue this discussion in the next part. Thank you.